Hey guys. New series. This is what if Naruto became Hidan. When Naruto wakes up in some alternate timeline decades before he's even born, he is obviously confused. Of course, when he wakes up in someone else's body as well, naturally, there aren't even words to describe how he feels. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 1 Prologue. Black Holes and Revelations. Sometimes knowing something doesn't change can be comforting, Naruto decided. Eyes closed, lying flat on his back, he instantly knew where he was. He could feel the murky water at his back as he floated on its liquid surface in silence, could smell the acrid salty scent of the sea and the familiar woody odors of the forest. So at peace was the usually energetic Jinchuriki, he could swear he heard the slow pounding of his heartbeat, even over his own gentle breathing and the incessant drip of water off in the distance. The endless stray droplets echoed just as they always had, their constancy as they penetrated the vast expanse of water covering the floor of the large cavern just another reassurance that, no matter how insane the outside world got, Naruto's mind was still the same as always. Sadly, this peace could not last forever. Already remembering in vivid detail exactly which events had preceded this impromptu trip into his own mind, Naruto in turn noted a rare sense of numbness entering his body. He felt nothing as his thoughts caught up with his current predicament, and processed the fact that he had, in all likelihood, just died. Given this potentially unpleasant information, it may not have seemed like something to be pleased about, but for a shinobi, someone who should at all times know where he was and how he got there according to one Kakashi Hatake, it was everything. So it was with dual dread and relief that Naruto could still remember, quite vividly mind you, his last days on this earth. How he'd entered the war with Killer Bee after facing down the fourth Raikage, fought off Edo Tensei zombie ninjas and Zetsu clone tree people alike by the droves before finally coming upon the resurrected forms of the other Jinchuriki with Bee, Kakashi, Guy and later Kurama at his side. The ensuing battle between the still-living duo of Jinchuriki and their enslaved Bijou counterparts raged for what felt like hours, only to end when Naruto managed to free and befriend those aforementioned Bijou. He then descended into that shared psychedelic dream world, learnt the names of the Bijou and their respective Jinchuriki. He even managed to bump fists with Son Goku, and later Shikaku and Matatabi respectively, before they and the rest of the tail beasts were forcibly dragged away from the mindscape and afterwards, the battlefield, only to be shoved back inside that sage-be-damned statue. This signaled the beginning of the end as far as Naruto was concerned when another battle with Tobi, who they'd since found out was actually Obito Uchiha, Kakashi's, mentally afflicted, former supposed to be dead teammate, broke out. By the time the Edo Tensei Madara Uchiha finally bothered to show up, Naruto, Bee, Kakashi and Guy were all just about dead on their feet. Understandably, everything kind of snowballed from there. Naruto, with the help of the newly befriended nine-tailed fox, Kurama, attempted to attack first the resurrected Uchiha and later the still living, and much more annoying, he later decided, Uchiha. However, to the dismay of both beast and its host, every attempted tactic inevitably failed. Naruto could remember the growing sense of hopelessness that plagued him as Kakashi and Guy were batted away like flies while Bees wound from his earlier skirmish with Koko, the Five Tails, began to reopen and pain him greatly. When Guy used the final inner gate of death to become Night Guy and took out Obito, it was both a relief and a tragedy considering Guy later died due to the strain the technique had on the spandex-wearing Jonin's body. After that, Naruto had thrown himself at Madara, tossing everything from Raisin Shurikens to tailed beast bombs at the bastard in some vain attempt to at least pin the monster down. In return, the Uchiha patriarch shrugged it all off and came at Naruto like an unstoppable force of nature. It was after that bloody battle that Naruto, completely exhausted and without an inch of his body that didn't scream out in pain, finally collapsed. However, even in his exhausted state, he had been conscious enough to feel Kakashi pick him up and flee the battlefield, all the while muttering something about not dying yet. Naruto had been sent back through to Konohagakure as far as he could tell and was for all he knew dying with all the technical mumbo-jumbo medical terms he had people screaming at him. After that he sort of floated in and out of consciousness for a while before the details got a little fuzzy. He knew that he somehow ended up in a medical tent set up deep in the Nara forest, one of the remaining outer regions of Konoha that hadn't been as badly affected by Pain/Nagato's earlier invasion on Konoha. After that, Naruto could only recall vague voices muttering more rubbish words he couldn't for the life of him ever hope to comprehend. The last thing he could at least in part recollect was a blood-curdling scream and a loud bang followed by a strange tingling sensation all over his body. You! It was Kurama's sudden screams of fury that finally broke Naruto from his musings. Pushing the mental manifestation of his body up into a crouched position on the water, never noticing that the lightning-like speed he used in the maneuver should have been beyond his capabilities without the use of Sage Mode, Naruto immediately turned his attention to the nine-tailed fox. The great creature was once again trapped behind the bars of its cage, its slitted red eyes filled with a fiery hatred as it clawed and attacked the interior of its prison. Naruto, in response to the biju's distress and rage, spun on his heels, crouched into a defensive position so he'd be ready to intercept the apparent enemy should he/she decide to attack. As such, imagine his surprise when he saw no one. Feeling confused, Naruto turned back around to the giant growling fox, about to tell it off for scaring him, when movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. However, it was not a person exactly as Naruto had expected. It was a reflection. Mirrored on the water's surface was the image of a man who stood just a little under Ero-sanen's height, the Jinchuriki estimated. He looked lean and well-muscled with smooth, pale alabaster skin, long silky silver hair pulled back into a ponytail that cascaded down to his mid-back, and distinctive purple eyes. Strangely enough, the man wore a black cloak with red lining and a high collar, though from what Naruto could see he wore no shirt underneath, only dark pants. It reminded Naruto of the Akatsuki cloak, just without the red cloud pattern on it. Black shinobi sandals adorned the reflected stranger's feet, his ankles wrapped tightly with bandages for extra support, and around his neck was a round pendant with a triangle in the center. A Jashin amulet? His fingernails were painted black with nail polish, Naruto noticed mindlessly, and on his back was what appeared to be a black and crimson three-bladed scythe. Altogether the man looked rather imposing, and Naruto recognized him easily from Shikamaru's recollections, regardless of the slight variations in his appearance. Hidan the Immortal, former Akatsuki member, stood there in all of his glory. He was alive, and judging from the position of the reflection he was also standing exactly where Naruto should be. Now, Naruto would be the first to admit that he wasn't exactly the sharpest kunai in the pouch. Even then, however, it didn't take a genius to figure out that the reflection of a possibly younger Hidan no Fumetsu, one, now belonged to him. Looking down at himself to confirm the theory, while silently dreading the results, Naruto came face to face with a black and red cloak and an extra several inches of height, not to mention the ungodly amount of chakra, even by his standards, he finally noted circulating his new leaner body. Trying to stay calm, Naruto decided to take a page out of Shikamaru's book and go about this logically, especially when he looked like an old enemy with Kurama only a few yards away, unaware that he was actually Naruto and not a crazy sadomasochistic psycho with wet dreams about mass murder. Shit. Okay, maybe it was time to go with the basics. Kurama, it's me. Naruto. Naruto interrupted the fox's ranting, noting absently that his voice had changed, deepened and warped, along with his appearance. Kurama in the meantime was looking way too happy at the idea of bisecting him for Naruto's comfort, though the pause in the biju's ranting gave Naruto some shred of hope for the future. Ha! Or maybe he just spoken too soon. Yeah, right. I wasn't born yesterday, you little shit. Now come over here so I can tear you to shreds and piss on the pieces. Kurama bellowed at the top of its lungs, the harsh sound creating ripples in the watery surface they both stood upon. No, I am Naruto. The Jinchuriki vehemently disagreed. I don't know how, but I kind of look like Hidan, I think. I'm not him though. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Tell me something only Naruto would know. Kurama replied cautiously after a moment of painful silence. Mizuki team first told me about you when I was 12 after he tried to trick me into stealing the Forbidden Scroll. You mean he succeeded in duping you into doing something that was so obviously stupid and a trap even an idiot would have known something was up and… Okay, yes, I'm an idiot. We get it. Naruto grumbled before sternly reminding himself to stay on track. What else is there? Oh, I've got it. The names of the 9 biju are Shikaku, Matatabi, Isabu, Son Goku, Koko, Saiken, Chome, Gyuki, and then yours is Kurama. And you call the Rikudo-san Nin old man kind of like I do with old man 3rd Hokage and that old geezer of Atsuchikage. Although, technically, okay, I get it. Damn, even that Akatsuki bastard couldn't possibly be as annoying as you are. Kurama grumbled, though Naruto privately liked to think that the fox looked a little bit sheepish at having been proven wrong and was trying to cover it up. So, any ideas of how or why I look like Hidan? Naruto asked the biju. No. Though it might have something to do with the fact that we aren't in Konoha anymore. Kurama replied. Wait, what? What do you mean we're not in Konoha anymore? How can you tell? Naruto demanded. Simple. Unlike you, I still have access to your outward senses and I cannot feel a single familiar chakra system. So, given your obvious change of identity and a likelihood of having been dumped in a place lacking in familiar life forms for a few miles in any direction, my theory is that we have either A. Been forcibly secreted away to yet another secluded island turtle, B. Been trapped in a rather elaborate genjutsu near the power of Tsukuyumi, C. Lost our damn minds, or D. Traveled through the very fabric of space and time into another prior timeline. Or maybe it's an alternate universe. You never know with those sorts of things. The giant fox finished with a slight shrug of its gargantuan shoulders, its very serious tone of voice leaving Naruto at a bit of a loss. My money's on option D. Time travel? Alternate universes? Naruto wouldn't admit to squeaking the questions out through his frozen lips. Nope. Not even under the pain of death. Possible alternate universes, Kurama corrected the former blonde, though how it knew all of this was beyond Naruto by this point. Holy shit, you're serious. How would time travel even work? What the hell does that mean? Am I stuck like this? Am I gonna die? Naruto exclaimed in an ever-growing panic. His new voice only sounded strange and foreign to his ears, though, further increasing his anxiety. Relax, brat. It's much simpler than that and not nearly as fatal as you're obviously thinking, idiot. The Bijou grumbled. You were probably somehow sent back in time. To what period we do not know yet, and for what purpose we, again, do not know. Luckily for you, I can at least somewhat figure out some of the logistics of time travel, and what you should expect. Kurama said, attempting to placate the still panicking ninja. Okay, but how will this affect me? An only slightly calmer Naruto asked. Finally, an intelligent question. Kurama exclaimed, only to receive a rather sour look from its now silver-haired host. Anyway, the Bijou continued on blithely, all the while ignoring Naruto's chronic pouting, since you've in all likelihood merged with, Hubert? Hernandez? No, Hidan was his name, right? Well, anyway, since you've merged with Hidan, it's probable that you've taken up his place in history, and whatever future we knew is now null and void. That's where the possible alternate universe thing comes in. Basically, it means that Naruto Uzumaki as we knew him will not be born in order to avoid a paradox. In fact, your becoming Hidan and Naruto as far as reality is concerned is probably the only reason you and I currently exist as more than figments of the imagination, or mindless vegetables, or something along those lines. Now I'm going to be perfectly honest with you here, brat. If you look like that, it's very likely that you will gain a few personality traits that were particularly strong in Hidan. So, off the top of my head, it's probably safe to say that you're going to be a little more, excessively, overbearingly violent. You'll probably swear a lot too if we take into account what that Shadow Kid and his team told you. Kurama explained. What? But I don't swear that much and I'm not that violent, by shinobi standards at least. I mean, I don't think I've even really killed anyone for no good reason or anything. Naruto frowned. He wasn't sure he'd technically killed anyone directly at all actually. Alright kid, how about you think about it like this then? You as in Naruto probably wouldn't act like that, but as Hidan, you'll be more like him personality-wise, and it's likely you'll pick up some of his bad habits, so you'll probably swear. Hell, you could very well become a mass-murdering psychopath given the right circumstances, and you could end up killing a lot of people because that was such an integral part of Hidan's being. Of course, we won't know to what extent Hidan's personality, and any possible memories you could gain will affect you. All we can do is take note of the changes and learn to make them work for us. Kurama explained. Alright, I get it. Naruto sighed, unhappy but grudgingly accepting of the possible changes. There wasn't anything he could do about it, so there was no use fussing over it. What else is there? What about the timeline? You mentioned paradoxes before. Naruto added. Well, the timeline isn't as rigid as most people would like to think, but since we're both here and we don't remember ever hearing anything about it in our own timeline, I'd say that the timeline we were in has been wiped from existence or disconnected from the timeline we currently occupy. That means we have a fresh start beginning at wherever we are now. Kurama said before letting out a loud sigh, looking troubled. Naruto, some things in history will have to happen, like my attack on Konoha or the Shinobi Wars. Those sorts of world-altering events are probably fixed into the timeline to an extent, and some of these fixed points will involve you, and you, as Hidan, will have to let them play out, maybe even participate. You may not be aware of it at the time. You may do something that makes complete sense one day, but at any other time it would be unthinkable. For example, Hidan may have to be a missing nin at some point for another major event to occur, so the universe will conspire to somehow make you a missing nin, somehow. Just do me a favor and remember that not everything is your fault. Naruto stared up at his friend, his brow furrowed as he thought over what the powerful Bija had told him. And though he didn't like it, again, what was there that he could do about it? If what Kurama said was true, then this was nature's way of keeping balance, and even if he didn't like it, nor did he want to admit it, Naruto knew that death was a natural process, and everyone had to die somehow in some way. He couldn't truly prevent all of the world's tragedies, as much as he wished otherwise. Okay, Naruto finally nodded in acceptance. What? Kurama near shrieked in shock, obviously confused by Naruto's sudden shift in attitude. I understand that most of the time things just aren't in my control. What is in my control is this new future. Maybe we can stop the Fourth War or at least win it quicker this time. We could destroy Akatsuki or stop Orochimaru. I could save Sasuke. There are so many possibilities. Naruto said in a rush, his mind racing. I know that I'll change a little, but if the major parts of Hidan are a part of me now, then shouldn't the most important parts of Naruto stay the same too? Yes, Kurama nodded carefully, seeing the logic in this idea. I agree with your reasoning. So what do I do now then, Kurama? Naruto asked, wanting to know what was first on the agenda. First on our list of things to do should be training, testing the limits of our power, and then finding out when and where we are. Maybe not in that order. I don't know. We should stick as close to Hidan's identity as possible though. That means you will use his name, his jutsu and his weapons. Obviously we'll adjust any fighting styles or techniques to suit Naruto too and vice versa until we won't be too suspicious. Just don't go around using things like Rasengan until we can figure out a way to explain them to anyone curious enough to ask. Kurama replied sagely. Okay, you've got it, Kurama. Naruto grinned. Good, now wake up, brat. Kurama smiled, almost feral, in return. Chapter 2, A Time-Traveling Shinobi. It had been 3 years since Naruto had first woken up in this new timeline. Since then both Kurama and Naruto had managed to regain and go over several stray memories of Hidan's, though most of it contained only basic knowledge like how to wield his triple-bladed scythe, which Naruto now kept sealed on his person at all times and a tattooed containment seal on his right wrist, or what Hidan's favorite food was. Apparently he'd had a fondness of spare ribs and despised vegetables, something Naruto could actually get behind. Otherwise important or more interesting events pertaining to Hidan's life were a blank to them both, however. Even his age was a complete unknown to the pair, though Kurama often tried to reassure them both that Naruto would remember it all someday. All in all, Naruto wasn't too hyped about the memories, or lack thereof. Sure, some of the knowledge was useful, but if Hidan had many more memories like that one with the now deceased midget, that shiny new pair of granny green nunchucks and those multicolored toilet seats, then he'd have to pass. Anyone with that sick of a sense of humor was, in Naruto's humble opinion, Orochimaru-level demented. Either way, the chronic nightmares and possible PTSD he'd had to suffer through before coming to terms with that one memory alone was not worth all the jutsu knowledge in the world. Not even close. Sadly, odds were he'd gain more recollections of those disturbing prank ritual murder things before coming across anything too noteworthy like a jutsu for creating ramen from thin air or a magical cure for attaining some ever-elusive world peace. However, spotty access to some of Hidan's somewhat patchy memories was not the complete extent of Naruto's latest line of achievements. Upon his initial awakening in the new timeline, Naruto had almost immediately set about doing as Kurama had suggested and began finding out anything and everything he could about the time and place he'd somehow managed to land himself in. It had taken a week of wandering, 3 nights at a seedy bar and a ton of subtle Kurama screen and pre-approved questions, but eventually Naruto had come to learn he'd been sent packing all the way back to the latter half of the Shodaime Hokage's reign. That's right, kids. Naruto Uzumaki was currently living in an era where Hiruzen Sarutobi, Naruto's once surrogate grandfather, was now at best a snot-nosed academy student somewhere in a far younger Konohagakure. At worst, Hiruzen Sarutobi wasn't even a speck in his father's eye yet. Naruto had, with Kurama's encouragement, read constant nagging, managed to do absolutely diddly squat about any of this. His resolution to stay well away from Konoha until his own lifetime came up was as much to avoid temptation as it was to skirt possible emotional issues like a surprise reunion with old man Sarutobi before said future Hokage had even hit puberty. Because Naruto knew without a doubt what would happen if he were right then faced with someone like Jiraiya or his father or even a person he'd known in passing, like Enko or Ebisu. He'd in all likelihood spill his guts and ruin everything, which was, according to the fox-shaped chakra monster in his gut, a big no-no. He didn't even want to think about what he was going to do when he inevitably ran into enemies like Kabuto, Orochimaru, and Danzo again. So instead of running to Konohagakure like a bat out of hell, for any reason, Naruto retreated deep into the forests surrounding Hai no Kuni and trained. In the beginning, Naruto decided he needed to know more about his new body. After all, it had taken him several hours to relearn the fine art of walking without tripping over face first every 6 steps. Kurama had of course managed to stave off a panic attack over this, thankfully temporary, inability to walk by explaining to the distressed time traveler that his new body was taller and leaner when compared to the shorter, stockier stature of his original form. Getting accustomed to those proportional differences was both tedious and painstaking, though obviously necessary and, in the end, well worth it too. While testing his new body, once he could run more than 10 steps without face planting, Naruto later found that he was now extremely agile, possessing tremendous acrobatic prowess and dexterity in avoiding attacks. In fact, the Jinchuriki found that both of his identities as Naruto and Hidan had a high proficiency in evasion in their own ways, making it difficult for opponents to land blows on either shinobi using taijutsu. Further experimentation had come with the realization that Naruto, like the original Hidan, was now basically immortal, giving him an inhuman level of stamina and endurance, more so than he'd once had in even his old Uzumaki body. Things like fatigue and chakra exhaustion were now even rarer conditions for Naruto, allowing him to go on for considerable periods of time without any need for stopping or slowing down. Even his overall durability was beyond comprehension, to the point of withstanding virtually any form of damage and still functioning properly sooner or later. Working from choppy memories, Naruto quickly concluded that only starvation and dismemberment via cutting would be able to incapacitate him for any real length of time. Given this newfound information, Naruto had quickly moved on to chakra and ninjutsu training. Much to his immediate joy, his impromptu temporal and physical displacement had not affected his wind elemental chakra, which, even as Hidan, remained his primary element. Through further experimentation and a thorough scouring of his mindscape, though, both Naruto and Kurama came to the startling realization that, before being ripped back into that horrible statue, Son Goku, Matatabi and Shikaku had managed to gift him with some of their chakra when they bumped fists with him. While the chakra itself couldn't be utilized, Naruto soon found that it gave him something else: the ability to use those specific Biju's respective chakra nature. From Matatabi, Naruto had gained the ability to use fire release as a secondary affinity, while from Shikaku he learned earth and, when used with his original wind release, magnet release similar to Gaara. From what little he managed to accomplish through slow experimentation, though, Naruto found metal easier to manipulate than sand, which he disappointingly had little success with yet. When combining his new earth and fire elements, Naruto was, as a final gift from Son Goku, now capable of using lava release as well. Naruto was understandably ecstatic about this newest development, so much so that even his lack of jutsu knowledge pertaining to just about all of these elements couldn't bring him down off his emotional high. Kurama himself was even silently optimistic, until reality sunk in again, and Naruto was given a small problem that quickly escalated into a cataclysmic disaster. While most people could use elemental ninjutsu without an affinity with only simple problems like shoddy control and or messier chakra usage, Naruto got explosions. That's right, people, Naruto couldn't even do a simple D-rank water jutsu without the stupid thing quite literally blowing up in his face. How a Daidara level explosion occurred while trying to work with water was beyond even Kurama by that point. Giving up on water and lightning release as a lost cause, Naruto had turned his attention to his supplementary and non-element based ninjutsu. You know, the ones without stupid things like an elemental affinity, or a lack thereof to get in one's way. It would surprise many that this would personally come to be Naruto's greatest issue in life to date, maybe even worse than the several S-rank missing nin trying their darndest to murder him, or his parents dying just before they sealed a 40+ foot tall fox in his gut, because Naruto, whether caused by the extra Biju chakra in his system, the body-switching thing or the joyride through time even, could no longer use the Rasengan. Sure, jutsu like his shadow clones and the sexy technique remain nearly unhindered by this newest disability, though far more difficult to use in quantity for probably the same god-awful reason. But Naruto soon found, much to his disappointment, that a lot of the jutsu he knew and loved were no longer applicable to him. Kurama quickly theorized that it had something to do with said jutsu having yet to be invented, and anomalies and quantum physics and more paradoxes and a few other really big words that made Naruto's head spin. No matter the technical explanation, it was all the same in the end. Naruto had lost some of his favorite jutsu, or at least some of the bits that made them cool, and in turn, a part of himself he'd always thought he'd have, even as Hidan. As a result, Naruto managed to stay in a proper funk for hours upon hours on end before a desperate Kurama finally remembered to point out his newest toy, thus taking advantage of Naruto's naturally rather short attention span and love of all things sharp, dangerous, and pointy. This brings us to the only reason Naruto got out of bed after just over a week of solid moping. Hidan's scythe. It was big, it was sharp, and it was just too awesome as far as Naruto was concerned. Its capabilities as a short and long-range weapon, and thus its incredibly unpredictable nature, also did nothing to dissuade the Jinchuriki's newly regained enthusiasm. Of course, incorporating the unusual weapon into his fighting style had been a bitch and had eventually required a thorough overhaul of his old Street Fighter style. Luckily, Naruto still managed to retain his unpredictability, and even injected some shadow clone usage. Sadly, he could only manage to make a few at a time now, even though he was pretty sure he had more chakra now than he had in his old body, with a few added alterations to make way for his new weapons, mainly his badass scythe and the several retractable metal spears he now kept hidden on his person at all times. Said weapons had since become very important to Naruto, maybe almost as important as the Rasengan had been, though whether that fondness was due to Hidan's influence or not was better left unknown to the Jinchuriki. The scythe itself was, while difficult to wield let alone lift off of the ground at all, more so intended to draw blood rather than inflict fatal damage, though it still certainly could. Upon realizing this, Naruto had begun working on the one jutsu, or curse, that Naruto could ever remember Shikamaru saying the original Hidan used. It had taken time and careful consideration with some detailed studying of everything either Naruto or Kurama could remember about the technique, either through their memories of conversation with Shikamaru or some of Hidan's. Thankfully though, Naruto eventually came to understand the basics of the jutsu and how to employ it in battle, adjusting it to again suit Naruto's style of fighting. For this technique, either using his weapon or not, Naruto would have to acquire his opponent's blood, where upon consuming it he would then draw the Jashin symbol on the ground to somehow link his body with his opponent's, just as Hidan had. Once this link was established, Naruto's new body would take on a grim reaper-like appearance with black skin and white bone-like markings, and then he would essentially become a living voodoo doll for his opponent. Any damage done to him would also be inflicted on the victim he blood-swiped. Surprisingly enough though, what scared Naruto most about the technique was not its gruesome nature but the fact that he found he wasn't at all concerned about the idea of toying with his victims by inflicting injuries and a slow death. Hell, the creepiest part was Naruto's new sense of detached pleasure at the idea of sharing that pain. Yes, Naruto found that he now indifferent to certain kinds of physical pain such as the kind found when stabbing himself in non-lethal areas to see his opponent's reaction. He had quickly deduced that this sadomasochistic reaction was one he had inherited from Hidan, and was now his own knee-jerk response to, even if it was at first very difficult to accept. The Curse Jutsu, as Kurama had cheerily nicknamed it, was, despite its effectiveness, not without many requirements. The main one was the fact that the link between Naruto and his opponent could be broken prematurely if Naruto was removed from the drawn symbol, even though Naruto would remain in his transformed state, allowing the curse to be easily re-established by him simply entering the symbol's borders once more. To rectify this, Naruto quickly theorized that if a bigger circle was drawn around a large area by, say, shadow clones, while the original fought and distracted the enemy, then removal from the symbol would be less likely and harder to achieve. With some experimentation, this idea became a reality, and even though Naruto had minimized one of the technique's main weaknesses, it was still an incredibly slow technique to employ, so it was decided by Kurama to be a trump card or a battle ender. From there, Naruto had focused all of his attention on the last two areas of battle he himself had only just mastered in his last life, Senjutsu and Jinchuriki transformations. It soon became apparent to both Kurama and Naruto that even though Kurama was still inside Naruto's body and mind, still inside the cage even, he wasn't technically sealed inside of him. After much speculation, Kurama had explained that the seal probably didn't quite exist yet and hadn't followed them into the past because it was too detrimental that Minato Namikaze created it. This in turn led them both to believe that the Kyuubi attack was indeed a fixed point in time. Understandably, Naruto had been upset, and it had taken Kurama an hour to convince its only friend that even if the former blonde did save his family, they weren't his family anymore. He was Hidan the Immortal now, not Naruto Uzumaki. Further experimentation, distractions, and a modified summoning jutsu later, and Naruto found to his delight that he could summon Kurama just like a summoning animal, and when Kurama dispersed, he was pulled back inside Naruto's body. However, like any Jinchuriki, Naruto immediately and acutely felt the loss of Kurama's chakra in the form of extreme debilitating pain, something not even his immortal body could adapt to quickly, though he obviously figured out he wouldn't die from the experience like all other Jinchuriki did. This was quite possibly because he still retained Son Goku, Matatabi and Shikaku's chakra in his system even without Kurama there. Or maybe it was the immortality thing again. Overall, And after maybe a little too much experimentation to be healthy, the summoning and remnants of his old emotion-based sensory abilities were confirmed to be the full extent of Naruto's control over Kurama's chakra. Of course, when it came to attempting to use his senjutsu on the other hand, Naruto had the shock of his life, besides waking up in someone else's body in another time period, when he felt a sudden tugging in his stomach and was then enshrouded in smoke. As soon as Naruto had attempted to collect nature energy, he had been reverse summoned to the land of the toads, Mt. Myaboku. It was just the same as he remembered it, giant plant life and all. Naruto was just steadying himself and reasserting in his mind that yes, he was indeed on Mt. Myaboku and not dreaming, when a familiar aged voice caught his attention. Sitting several feet away on a rock bringing his small stature up to Naruto's hips was Fukasaku, looking just as he had in the future. "Who are you and why are you here?" Fukasaku asked, his tiny green body visibly puffing up in anger at the apparent intrusion. It suddenly occurred to Naruto that Jiraiya hadn't been born yet, so Fukasaku had probably not seen a human in a very long time, not since the last summoner, which was probably decades ago at this point. Did you say something?" The words left Naruto's mouth before he could formulate a different response, much to his disappointment. Fukasaku was someone he'd known in his old timeline, someone who Naruto respected greatly. He was also the first person Naruto had really come into any prolonged significant contact with since he'd arrived in this timeline. Did he really want the first actual conversation outside of arguments and joking about with Kurama to begin with something Kakashi would say? The answer was understandably no, though there wasn't much he could do about it now. He'd already spoken. Actually, upon noticing the furrow in Fukasaku's brow, Naruto came to the conclusion that his one-time sensei was reacting like just about everyone else did when confronted with Kakashi's usual. That is to say, Naruto's words had annoyed the ever-living crap out of him. "I said, who are you and why are you here, outsider?" Fukasaku bit out jerkily. "Oh, well, I'm Hidan, and as for why I'm here, I was hoping you could tell me," Naruto said with a deceptively genial grin on his handsome features, a stray lock of silver falling from his low ponytail to hang in his face as he tilted his head slightly to the side. The expression was as close as Naruto could get to innocent with Hidan's body. It beat the manic grin he'd unconsciously sported upon his initial arrival in his new timeline. Many people had shied away from him, ran for the goddamn hills, during that tentative time. Why would I tell yo dash? Pa. Naruto felt his posture sag a little when Fukasaku was thankfully cut off by another familiar voice before he could really get going. "Pa, there you are!" Shima exclaimed as she hopped into view, her tiny body moving rather quickly despite her advanced age. Then again, Naruto moved pretty well, and he was, as far as Kurama's most recent calculations went, at the very least several decades old. "The great Toad Sage brought an outsider to us. He wants to talk to Hai." Shima seemed to trail off as she finally noticed Naruto's presence, her beady little eyes widening as she came to a stop only a few feet away from him. "Look, there he is!" She shouted up at him before turning back to Fukasaku, who looked rather perplexed and a little embarrassed in light of the situation. "Pa, the great Toad Sage wants to talk to him!" Shima cried out, her voice shrill in her sudden urgency. "Come on, outsider. You have to follow me." "Oh, and you'd better come too," Pa, Shima added as an afterthought. Reaching up to grip the dark fabric of Naruto's cloak, the part she could reach anyway, the elderly toad began to pull Naruto towards a familiar path towards the great Toad Sage. As he was tugged along, Naruto began to think back and remember, quite vividly, the great Toad Sage, which led to silent wonderings on whether the ancient toad would know of his predicament or not. If anyone could, it would be him. Quietly, Kurama mentally agreed with the time traveler's deduction through their telepathic link. Only the other Bijou or possibly the old sages of the summoned clans would have even a chance at being able to, on their own, tell the truth about Naruto's origins. Upon finally entering the large cave-like structure, Naruto was greeted by a familiar sight, the great Toad Sage in all of his senile glory. True to the last part of that statement, the old toad ordered everyone from the room except Fukasaku, Shima, and Naruto, whom he only ever addressed as that one throughout the dismissal. Soon all of the other little toads had fled the cavern, leaving Naruto slightly uncomfortable given the glares he was receiving from Fukasaku, and the appraising looks he got from Shima. The great Toad Sage just squinted at him thoughtfully before finally speaking. "Ah, so you are the outsider," he began, appearing remarkably attentive given what Naruto could remember of the old sage's more scattered mental habits. Then again, Naruto originally met the great Toad Sage over half a century from this point in time, so maybe, judging by the confusion in Fukasaku and Shima's expressions, Naruto concluded that the behavior was indeed odd and took comfort in the fact that he wasn't the only one at a loss about it. We meet again, Hidan no Fumetsu. The great Toad Sage smiled suddenly, instantly bringing Naruto's attention careening back to the matter at hand. I didn't think we'd met before. Naruto replied cautiously, diplomatically, at Kurama's mental prompting. I haven't met you, true, but you have met me. Now tell me, Hidan no Fumetsu, what is it you plan to do about this situation we find ourselves in? Before you decide against my idea, understand that I am prepared to offer you a contract with this clan, not because I specifically favor you but instead due to your knowledge of our clan's techniques, the Great Toad Sage said carefully. What do you mean, Great Sage? Fukasaku asked, his tone easily managing to convey his confusion, whilst also simultaneously imploring the Elder Toad for answers. Naruto noted this new, even higher level of respect the Great Toad Sage received from both Fukasaku and Shima, something he was sure he'd remember from his own era if he'd ever played witness to it before. Then again, even another half a century of being annoying could have toned that down by the time Naruto was originally born. This human hails from a future. As far as I can tell, he was once two shinobi, but the process that brought him here has somehow made them one being. Though, how he managed to create such a distinct separation between his old mind and his new body with a bija thrown in there too, I'll never know. The Great Toad Sage squinted down at the silver-haired time traveler, the last sentence managing to get a reaction from all present though for very different reasons. A bijou! Fukasaku exclaimed, looking flustered and panicked at the thought. Time travel, Shima murmured, her expression, alternatively to her husband's, intrigued. Yes, why don't you explain, he and the immortal? The Great Toad Sage inquired, suddenly amused by the little toad's reactions as well as Naruto's hidden unease at the situation. Feeling all eyes turned to him, Naruto refused to be intimidated by the stares and instead turned his attention to what needed to be said. Even though he'd managed to last the whole 3 years alone with only Kurama for company in this era, it didn't mean he hadn't missed the toads, nor did it mean he wasn't in need of some allies. I was once a shinobi with a different name, Naruto began quietly, deciding to be cautious and vague again upon Kurama's suggestion. He could never be sure if what he knew would remain the same given how different things could turn out in the long run, even with only minimal interference. Prior to waking in this time, I was first a toad summoner and sage trained by Fukasaku and Shima. I was also a Jinchuriki in that life. The other part of me was an enemy of the first, and while I retained the memories, some skills and the mindset of the first shinobi, I was left with the physical body, skills and only a few select memories of the second. He was an S-rank missing nin from Yugakure, and as the Great Toad Sage already mentioned, he was named Hidan, the name I am currently using. Naruto explained slowly with Kurama's voice in his ear, feeding him the subtle wording just in case. Naruto had never been very eloquent with his words and Hidan was even worse. Best leave it to his own resident bija/built-in grammar checker to handle. The Great Sage called you immortal, Fukasaku said pointedly. Yes, Hidan, this body I have right now is pretty much that. From the vague memories I've received as well as past experiences in dealing with my second self, I can confidently tell you that he's been decapitated, set on fire and buried alive only to be left still breathing and cursing afterwards. Naruto nodded. Your personalities? Shima asked, having picked up on the hints Naruto's own personal bija/prompter hadn't, on such short notice, bothered to edit out properly. They merged. As far as I've been able to tell, I'm friendly enough generally, though a little more childish still. I do have more of Hidan's personality than I would like, Naruto admitted with a grimace, trying to skirt around the issue, though Kurama voiced its disapproval quite loudly as he did. Apparently, Kurama thought that, in this one case, it would be better to give them all an honest heads-up in regards to his personality quirks, as Kurama had once jokingly dubbed them. It had become apparent early on in this new life that Naruto no longer got just angry anymore. Ironically enough, Hidan and Naruto tended to be more easily angered than most, and when angered, they also often exploded in rage. So, it wasn't too far of a stretch to come to the conclusion that Naruto no longer did just angry anymore. No, instead he went into an apocalyptic fury and raged with murderous and particularly psychotic intent to the point that even he couldn't stop himself. Usually mountains were leveled, words no one should hear were uttered, and a lot of people in general just didn't survive. Since coming to this terrifying conclusion, both Kurama and Naruto had resolved to meditate in order to try and keep such murderous impulses to a minimum. So far they had succeeded, and instead, when angered, Naruto merely cursed a lot and only attempted to commit murder on a massive scale instead of automatically succeeding no matter what by flattening anything and anyone who tried to stop him. This personality quirk was a disturbing contrast to Naruto's usual behavior, which resembled a cross between Naruto, Kakashi, and Jiraiya. In fact, Naruto had even toyed with the idea of stealing Kakashi's tardy habits, since he already had Jiraiya's turbulent mood swings down packed. After conversing with Kurama, the two decided that they would in fact attempt to emulate some of the One-Eye Jonin's particularly annoying habits, and had since gotten into the habit of using his comebacks when not paying attention, as he had when initially greeting Fukasaku. It was all at first to see whether it was as fun as it looked, but later Naruto decided that if he was going to be someone else, he was going to be someone interesting, and one of the most interesting people Naruto had ever met was his former wayward sensei. Besides, no one could call him a copycat. Kakashi hadn't even been born yet, so that meant he was, technically, the first to be chronically tardy and use such horrible excuses for said tardiness. And the negatives? Shima pressed, bringing Naruto back to the matter at hand. Looking over to the eldest sage for help, Naruto received only a sly grin in return. Go figures, the one time he wouldn't have minded the great Toad Sage's more senile habits, and the bastard decided to be lucid. Hidan was, to put it simply, a foul-mouthed, sadomasochistic zealot with psychotic tendencies and an apparent love for mass murder and slaughter. The guy was insane. I share a few of those traits myself now, though I need to be for some of his techniques. Here Naruto shivered, though with anticipation or revulsion he wasn't sure. I'd found that I'm rather violent in a fight. I'm way too sadistic in general for my liking, and anger issues doesn't even begin to cover what I have. Luckily, mediation helps the last one. Naruto continued, explain the Bija part. Fukasaku demanded, seemingly accepting Naruto's time travel issues as an unchangeable fact and not dwelling on the matter, much like Naruto had with everything regarding the whole damned situation. How refreshing, show me. The great Toad Sage interrupted. Both Fukasaku and Shima sent Naruto confused looks, but Naruto was already aware of what the old toad had asked of him. Waiting patiently, Naruto nodded when Kurama stated that the room was probably too small for what the sage had in mind, and it was not a good idea to begin with no matter which way you looked at it. With all due respect, Giant Grandpa Sage, Naruto said, his eyes suddenly narrowed and his expression stone cold. Either my friend or I think it would be wise to summon the nine-tailed fox in such an enclosed space, even if Kurama means peace. The gobsmacked expressions on Ma and Pa's faces were totally worth the possible insult the great Toad Sage could have taken from the statement. However, soon the sounds of loud rumbling laughter echoed around the cavern. Turning his attention to the source of the sound, Naruto was graced with the sight of a highly amused great Toad Sage almost rolling on the floor with laughter. It seemed Shima and Fukasaku were just as confused as Naruto if the perplexed expressions on their wrinkled faces were anything to go by. There is one thing that confuses me though, Naruto said as the laughter had quietened down. Go on. The great Toad Sage encouraged him after a few last chuckles. Earlier, you commented on the different aspects of my mind and my new body. I can somewhat rationalize your knowing about me before I even knew where I was, but how'd you know about Hidan? Naruto asked, his head tilted slightly to the side as he spoke. At this moment you are an anomaly I have yet to encounter before. You already know how I knew though. You possess the original Hidan's memories after all. You might not be able to access them all yet, but one day you will. Until then, you'll just have to be patient, old one, the great Toad Sage said, grinning down at Naruto with squinted eyes as if evaluating him all over again. Naruto in turn squinted right back up at the ancient toad, his mind racing before he eventually decided that the elderly toad's lack of a proper answer either meant didn't know himself, or he'd wanted to annoy Naruto by trying to sound mysterious and wise. Old one, Shima muttered, looking up at Naruto with calculating eyes, something Naruto found that he was as uncomfortable with as he had been in his old timeline, much to Kurama's amusement. Yes. I'm not yet sure if you've realized it by now, but Hidan here is old even by the standards of us summons. Given the average natural life expectancy of his species, his rate of aging, or lack thereof, is as interesting as his temporal misplacement is incredible. The great Toad Sage explained genially. Surely you jest, great sage. Fukasaku exclaimed, apparently not finding the situation nearly as amusing as his elder was. No, that sounds about right. Naruto nodded in agreement, having already come to that conclusion before when he had first woken in his new timeline and sorted through the remnants of Hidan's available memories, the ones that weren't too traumatizing anyway. I see how you would think that. Naruto conceded. Indeed. The great Toad Sage said, now, I am still waiting for an answer to my first question, Hidan no Fumetsu. Will you sign our contract? I don't know if you have to be told, but, provided you do agree, You will be considered an elder sage of this clan given your advanced age as well as your knowledge of the Toad clan and our techniques, the old toad said, momentarily shocking Naruto with the generous offer. Will you rejoin our family, Naruto Uzumaki of the Leaf? The old toad finally asked. Naruto stared up at the old toad, tears in his eyes before he nodded his head, Kurama's voice mocking him for the sappy show of emotion annoyingly in the background. Okay. Naruto nodded, and just like that, Naruto had taken his first real and lasting step in establishing himself in this new world and changing the future, for the better hopefully. Chapter 3. Those Everyday Occurrences. Upon finally lifting his heavy eyelids, Naruto turned irritated violet eyes on the one who had dared to awaken him from his slumber. An older man in his late 50s with graying brown hair and wizened blue eyes stood over the silver-haired shinobi with a weary expression on his weathered face. This man was Kamizuki Shigeru, the Shodaime Yukage of the village hidden in hot water. While Naruto had made it a point of calling him Old Man Kamizuki from the very beginning of his stay in the village to both annoy the man and show his affection for him, the village leader had a very good reason to be cautious. After all, Kamizuki had on multiple occasions been privy to the true horror afflicted by Naruto's particular personality quirks, and had been one of the few to have survived more than one angry outburst from the Jonin in the 2 years since he had joined the village. Waking up a sleeping Hidan had proven early on to be a potentially fatal endeavor for anyone even remotely involved and or vaguely in his vicinity at the time of said awakening. What? Naruto growled, eyes narrowed at the older-looking man with both irritation and contempt. Slowly, he raised his body up to a seated position to better glare at the man. What possible reason could you have for waltzing on in here and waking me up in the morning hours after the night I just had? Naruto asked, his voice dangerously low and a bit too quiet given how much he wanted to kill someone in that very moment. Well, one reason would be that you're in my office. Kamizuki replied good-naturedly, hiding his unease with professional skill and a hell of a lot of practice. Huh? How did I get here? Naruto asked, having already started blinking away the remaining sleep in his eyes, his anger temporarily diffused by the Yukage's unconventional statement. Finally deigning to actually glance around the room he'd commandeered during the early morning hours, Naruto quickly came to realize that yes, he was indeed in the old Yukage's office. In fact, he was currently sitting on the man's desk where he had situated his rather tall frame the night before after many hours of sneaking around with a literal ton of alcohol and drinking it all with both Kurama and the juvenile delinquent that was a teenage Gamabunta back at MT Mayaboku. Just 3 words came to mind: never. Ever. Again. Wait, don't answer that. I already know the answer. Naruto grumbled while stretching his arms out above his head, his long silver hair no doubt mussed from sleep. He wasn't about to attempt to stand just quite yet, though it was probably thanks to Kurama's presence in his mind and his own immortality, or more the advanced healing both granted, that Naruto was spared from the most likely horrific headache he'd otherwise have had to endure. Okay, so maybe it was thanks to Kurama's presence and the immortality thing that Naruto was even alive after consuming that much alcohol in one sitting. I'm sure I don't want to know, the old Kage agreed with a small smile, amused. However, he continued, I have another reason for waking you, Hidan. Sometimes it amazed Naruto how patient the man was, but then again, he was a Kage, though not technically a real Kage since Yugakure wasn't one of the major 5 hidden villages, though the whole idea still counted in Naruto's opinion. The job as leader of a hidden shinobi village, no matter how big or small, required patience on a whole other level Naruto had found. It was something he had accepted when he'd wanted to be Hokage. Now he had long since abandoned the idea and put his efforts towards a new dream, Jiraiya's dream. Peace and a better future for all. That was his goal, and now that he was an immortal with a proverbial clean slate, and what looked like eternity in front of him if all went well, Naruto was determined to see that dream through. Eventually, somehow. Okay, Naruto said slowly, now slightly suspicious. He could sense an approaching long-winded lecture. A sixth sense for impending doom Kurama chimed sarcastically from within his mind. Getting up from the table, Naruto waited for Kamizuki to take a seat and get to the point. Hidan, you have been here for 2 years. In that time, you have made Jonin rank quite easily and gone on a rather impressive amount of high-ranked missions that have brought this village great wealth. Your contributions have also helped to create a good professional reputation for us, even with some of your less than charming personality traits, and your quite honestly appalling attitude when dealing with certain situations, and places, and people, Kamizuki said, pausing, probably to see Naruto's reaction, possibly even waiting for an indignant outburst in his own defense. All Naruto could hear though was a telepathic "here it comes" from Kurama before the Yukage began to speak again, having assumed Naruto had nothing to say. However, it is your connections with the village, or rather, your lack of them that I worry about. You don't have any close friends or family here, and your interactions with our shinobi are limited strictly to missions and an occasional visit to a local bar or restaurant. To remedy this, I have decided that you will be taking on a genin team. I don't know everything about your past, Hidan, and I won't pretend to, but I think this will be good for you as a person, to make connections with others, and it will be good for the younger generation as well. You are an incredibly skilled shinobi, and I think you've barely scratched the top of your power and ability around me. So much so I believe you have probably already even surpassed me. Kamizuki stated with a gentle smile. Naruto wanted to grin like a loon, dance, strangle the genial Kage that reminded him so much of an elderly Hiruzen Sarutobi, and then maybe violently kill something small and or probably adorable all at the same time. One half of him was excited, a genin team. He would be a teacher and a mentor just as his sensei had all been to him. Meanwhile, the other half of him, the half that was reluctant to, as Kamizuki had put it, make connections, was terrified of losing those he cared about, which left him with a bit of a dilemma. Should he or should he not? Graduation finished yesterday, and today your students will be waiting for you to fetch them from the academy at midday. If you want them, go get them. If not, I'll have to find someone else. Just think about it, Hidan, Kamizuki said. The dismissal in his tone was easily recognizable to the time traveler. Naruto remained silent for only a moment before accepting that he should at least consider what the Yukage was saying, much like he had conceded to at least give everything else that had been thrown headlong at him in his life ago. Okay, old man Kamizuki, I'll think about it. Naruto conceded before turning to collect his black and red cloak off of the floor and cover his otherwise bare chest. Finally, slinging his copy of the overly large summoning contract of the toads that had been gifted to him upon rejoining the clan over his shoulder, Naruto pulled on his shinobi sandals and left the office with a lot on his mind. And don't call me old man Hidan, you bastard! Was finally shouted by the disgruntled Yukage just as Naruto slammed the door shut behind him. The ocean blue eyes of Kamizuki Shigeru followed Hidan through the open window as he left the main administration building of the village. Ever since meeting the young man 2 years ago in the woods, Kamizuki had noticed something different about the silver-haired shinobi. At first he had thought it was the man's appearance. He was tall and lean with that impossibly long silver hair, and those deep violet eyes that seemed to have seen the entirety of the world. It could have also been the overly large three-bladed scythe the powerful if not odd, red, mentally unstable, shinobi had so easily wielded at his head after accidentally waking said aforementioned silver-haired man from his sleep. When the red and black weapon had then cut clean through a tree in a single slice after Kamizuki had dodged the initial attack, the older man had been shocked at the speed the unconventional weapon had been wielded with, and the power behind the blow. It was actually upon further inspection, or rather, a tiring game of cat and mouse in which Kamizuki ran and dodged for his life, that Kamizuki decided, for some ungodly reason he still couldn't quite wrap his head around, that the silver-haired shinobi would be a perfect new addition to his ranks, especially after finding himself incapable of landing so much as a single lasting hit on the younger man. Kamizuki had even stated so to the ninja. Of course, this comment had earned him a ticked-off shinobi cussing him out, using words Kamizuki hadn't even heard of, let alone known the meaning of at the time, and a rather painful blow to the head with the blunt side of that aforementioned triple-bladed scythe. So, it had understandably surprised Kamizuki when he woke the next morning, only to realize he was alive and not dead in a ditch somewhere. Overall, in the time that preceded his return to Yukikure, the wizened Kage learned 3 things. Number 1. The equally strange and powerful ninja that had almost killed him the night before with the lethal-looking scythe was a rogue ninja by the name of Hidan. Number 2. Kamizuki was to not under any circumstances, outside of an extraordinary situation in which life as we know it is at risk of complete destruction due to a war between a horribly cliché, hypercritical, and highly unoriginal megalomaniac bent on world domination via hypnotizing the population of the world with a genjutsu, a tailed beast and the moon and everyone else, in Hidan's words anyway, piss Hidan off. Number 3. There wasn't a snowball's chance in hell of Kamizuki convincing Hidan to join his village. He, however, said nothing about blackmail, and so Kamizuki had bluffed, claiming that he would send armies after Hidan for the attempt on his life the night before unless Hidan agreed to join hot water. This of course had led to the utterance of many naughty words, some of which a sailor would blush at, before Hidan agreed, all the while threatening to kill Kamizuki with a rusty spoon of all things should he try anything. Needless to say, the Yukage had returned to his village with Hidan in tow, and from then on, he had found a friend and confidant in the younger shinobi, even if the cheeky bastard called him an old man at every turn just to tick him off. These occurrences all brought Kamizuki's rapid mind back to one rather tremulous train of thought. that Hidan's emotional well-being and lack of lasting connections to the village were only half the reason Kamizuki wanted Hidan to be more socially active. The other half originated from whisperings among the council and civilians alike, talks and grumblings and rumors that left the old Kage worried. Because while the council muttered and grumbled over finances just as they always had, they had lately also turned their sights on Hidan, one of their more powerful shinobi but a foreigner nonetheless, an outsider. Hidan made them and the village a lot of money, much more than most other shinobi amongst Yugaku's ranks, and as petty as they were, the council and the yes-men they surrounded themselves with were unhappy about it. Their reasoning was, of course, that as an outsider, Hidan should be a second-class citizen in hot water. To Kamizuki's great displeasure, the clans weren't much better. The civilians, meanwhile, gossiped about change, about different industry and the natural resources surrounding Yugaku. They were, much like the council, greedy, though Kamizuki suspected in a different way. In the end, all of this added up to one thing in Kamizuki's mind: revolution. The wizened old Kage had been watching his back for weeks, and already, he'd had 2 attempts on his life in only the last 8 days. However, Kamizuki was still several steps ahead of his traitorous foes. He still had a secret weapon at his disposal should anyone succeed in killing him off and attempting to do so to those he still held close. A shinobi didn't get to be as old as he had for nothing after all. 5 hours had passed since Naruto had left the Yakuja's office. It had been 3 hours since he began cursing old man Kamizuki's mother, and it had been about 2 hours ago now that midday had gone by. Naruto tilted his head back and grinned vindicatively up at the sky as he wandered carelessly through the bustling streets of Yugaku. Naruto had decided not long after leaving Kamizuki's office that he would take up his offer and become a Jonin sensei. That didn't mean he had to like it. It also didn't mean he couldn't be the traditional 3 hours late arriving at the academy as a little food to the old Kage for putting him on the spot like that. And so, it was another hour later Naruto found himself just outside of classroom 4D at the academy. Keeping his collar unbuttoned a bit so the entirety of his face was visible, Naruto took a deep breath in and opened the door. Inside the classroom were his 3 possible could-be future students, each more annoyed at his tardiness than the last. Entering the room, Naruto quickly studied his new possible could-be future students with great, though hidden, interest. Sitting rigidly behind the desk directly in front of Naruto was a 12-year-old boy. His hair was a particular shade of red set in gravity-defying spikes. Twin green eyes peered up at him from behind a cold, bored demeanor. Beside him, looking rather annoyed, was another boy a good few inches taller. He had black hair cut short, matching dark eyes, and an annoyed pout plastered all over his face. Atop his head was a green bandana with the Yugaku headband displayed proudly. On the other side of the red-haired boy was a girl only a fraction shorter than him. Her eyes were brown and large, reminding Naruto immediately of a doe. Her hair was straight, at shoulder length, and the color of warm chocolate. On her left cheek she had a distinctive scar an inch or so long, though where she got it at her age, and lack of actual combat experience, was beyond Naruto. "Hello there," Naruto grinned, his demeanor cheerful and blasé to any misgivings the 3 children could have had with him for being as late as he was. "Sorry I'm late, but I got arrested by accident, and it took a while to clear my name." "You're lying!" the boy with the bandana and the lone girl screamed. As soon as the words left their lips, Naruto once again thought about exactly why it was Kakashi had done this to just about everyone he'd ever met. It was amusing as all hell. "I'll be your new sensei. Meet me outside." Naruto continued, ignoring the death glare he was receiving from the redhead with a goofy grin plastered upon his face. That said, Naruto made a show of disappearing from their view with quick use of one of the few older techniques he was still capable of using after his temporal displacement, the body flicker technique, Shunshin no Jutsu. Appearing outside at the base of a large oak tree, Naruto made sure he was comfortable while he waited for his possible could-be future students to arrive. Unsurprisingly, he didn't have to wait very long until the 3 came running out of the academy looking rather frantic. Also unsurprisingly, it was the redhead who spotted Naruto first and headed towards him, never once alerting his possible could-be future teammates to his presence. "Typical. Take a seat," Naruto finally said once all 3 of his possible could-be future students had assembled. "Alright," he continued once everyone was nice and comfy, "why don't you brats introduce yourselves so we can get this show on the road? Start with your likes, dislikes, hobbies and dreams. Those sorts of things," Naruto instructed them, a cheery smile spreading across his pale face. He could clearly remember his own introduction into the shinobi world alongside Kakashi and Team 7 with both fondness and a profound sense of longing and loss. "Why don't you go first, girlie?" he asked, gesturing to the lone girl of the group to talk. With a nervous smile she spoke up. "Hello, My name is Emi Higurashi and I like my friends, the village and learning new things about medicine. I dislike those who harm my friends, my stepsister and people who make assumptions. My hobbies include cooking and practicing medical ninjutsu. My dream is to become a medical ninja and heal people. Nodding his head, Naruto turned to the boy with the green bandana. Okay, you with the headgear, Naruto said, indicating the kid in front of him. Okay, he cried, a goofy smile plastered to his face. He was acting sort of like Naruto? Yes, he was acting just like Naruto had as a child. My name is Yukio Sano, he cried. I like learning awesome new jutsu and my little sister. I dislike the village's attitude towards outsiders like Junko and those who judge a book by its cover. My hobbies include learning new jutsu and playing with Junko. My dream is to prove to everyone that I'm not a waste of space and maybe one day I'll become Yukage. Yukio cried out enthusiastically. Okay, looks like you're up, red hair. Naruto nodded with a never-ending grin still in place. My name is Nanashiro. I don't like a lot of things and I dislike many, though if I have to mention some, I would say I dislike incompetence and those who do not take things seriously. I enjoy training to become a better tool to my village and learning new jutsu. My dream is to be a good ninja and help to restore my clan's former honor and prestige. The red-haired boy stated in a monotonous voice, void of any real emotion beyond a sense of vague annoyance and boredom. They were like a mirror image of the old Team 7, and Naruto decided then and there that irony existed, and it wasn't funny. Nope, not one little bit. Alright then, Naruto grinned happily, eyeing his victim. He meant possible could be future students, with wide violet eyes. I'm Hidan, but that's Hidan-sensei to you. It's been implied by the head honcho that I should try to keep this PG, so let's see. I like naughty words, Karama, toads and killing things that bug me. I dislike things that bug me and pretentious little assholes who think they know all. My hobbies include killing the things that bug me, strip poker and gardening. My dream is to, I don't actually think there's a way to censor that. I had a dream last night though. Naruto finished thoughtfully. Should probably censor that too actually. Glancing around, he noticed that each of his possible could-be future students wore similar expression of unease and or disbelief at his introduction. Even Nanashiro, the snobby green-eyed one that reminded him of a cross between Sasuke and the stuck-up version of Neji. As his grin gradually twisted into something just a little too evil for his purposes, Naruto decided that it was time for the fun to begin. Meet me at Training Ground 9 tomorrow at 8. He said, oh, and don't eat breakfast or you'll throw up. Naruto grinned and once again disappeared into thin air. Chapter 4. Monster Senseis and Life Lessons. 3 hours late. Yukio muttered angrily to himself. He'd been sitting at Training Ground 9 since 8 that morning, just as instructed, having painstakingly roused himself from bed and forced himself to leave without a bite to eat, just as instructed. It was currently 11:15 and every inch of Yukio's being wanted to throttle his sensei. Yesterday, Yukio had been content to find he was on the same team as Emi. She was decent at least and not a fangirl, only to have those feelings of contentment crushed when that bastard Nanashiro had been put on his team as well not even 2 seconds later. By that point, he'd still naively had hope for an awesome Jonin sensei. That hope had gradually diminished an hour into waiting for that teacher to arrive, especially when all of the other graduates, and even their Chunin instructor had left. Finally, another 2 hours after that milestone, the door had opened and by this point Yukio had been prepared to throw kunai at whoever was on the other side. It was then that he'd first met his sensei. Standing in the doorway was a man who by appearances alone had nearly killed any and all hope for the future that Yukio had retained. The man had been tall with a lean build and pale skin. His hair was incredibly long, hanging to his lower back even when it was pulled up into a ponytail, and was a pale silver color. Meanwhile his eyes were also a distinctive violet color, and seemed way too carefree for a shinobi. Covering the man's torso was a black knee-length cloak with a red inner lining and a high collar that he had unzipped so that Yukio could easily make out the man's straight nose and high cheekbones. However, Yukio could also tell that the man wore no shirt underneath the cloak, only dark gray pants and a pair of black shinobi sandals on his feet, his ankles wrapped tightly with bandages. Finally tied around his neck was a Yugakure headband and what looked like a round pendant with a triangle in the center. All in all, the guy could have been intimidating, if it hadn't been for the goofy grin he'd had plastered on his face. He even wore nail polish for God's sake. Meanwhile, something else about the man eventually caught Yukio's interest during his perusal, rekindling his hope. It was the large scroll slung over the man's right shoulder. It was absolutely huge and probably weighed a ton. Red and white parchment lined with intricate black writing covered the exterior. Yukio could only imagine what kind of cool weapons the man had stored inside. However, what had preceded the man's initial entrance had belied any awe Yukio felt for the man after identifying the scroll. Or rather, just the scroll itself now. His future sensei had been more childish than his 5-year-old adoptive sister, as he grinned at them all with that closed-eye smile that seemed to scream innocence and goofiness, even with the man's tall figure and potentially scary appearance. He just wasn't that intimidating with that expression on his face, or when he spoke in such a carefree manner. And his excuses. He honestly expected them to believe that he was 3 hours late because he'd gotten arrested by accident, and it took a while to clear his name? That was the best he could come up with. He should have just said he couldn't have been bothered to show up on time. It would have saved him the mental strain it obviously took to think up a halfway decent excuse. And when the introductions came, Yukio was once again let down when his tardy sensei hadn't even taken that seriously. Because, come on. Naughty words? Gardening? What was this guy trying to get at? By the time Hidan sensei left, Yukio had been half tempted to march back to the academy and demand an actual sensei, not the random loser who had stumbled into their classroom and proceeded to bumble through whatever that had just been. Hell, the fact that the guy arrived 3 hours late should have been indicative enough that the guy was incompetent. Even teacher's pet Emi and Nanisher, the bastard extraordinaire himself, obviously thought so too. Do you think he'll even show up? Yukio wondered aloud, his expression sullen. I don't know. He was late yesterday. Maybe he's just late again. Emi tried to reason. Nanisher muttered, though whether he agreed or not was beyond Yukio. He didn't speak emo. Suddenly, there was a whooshing sound, and like the day before, Hidan sensei appeared in a gust of wind and smoke, popping into existence from thin air looking exactly as he had the day before, smile and all. While the man was, as far as Yukio could tell, pretty pitiful as a shinobi, that jutsu did look kind of cool. Hello everyone! He exclaimed enthusiastically. Sorry I'm so late, but I was busy sealing a tailed beast. You lie! Yukio screamed irritably. His excuse was somehow even worse than yesterday. Anyway, gather around so I can tell you the purpose of today's lesson, Hidan said, ignoring Yukio's outburst as if he hadn't said a thing. Realizing that there wasn't any real point in continuing the argument, Yukio, like the others, moved in closer until they stood in a semicircle around their sensei, waiting. Alright, today we'll be doing some survival training. Hidan grinned down at them. Survival training? Yukio asked, perking up slightly at the sound of it. Maybe they were going to run some awesome obstacle course of death, or track down some evil rogue ninja of death and fight them to the death. It may not beat cool ninjutsu, but it would be way better than class work and theory. Yup. This will be a test. And as soon as the word test left Hidan sensei's lips, Yukio's excitement shriveled. If you pass, not only will you become genin, but you will have also managed to survive, thus survival training. Survive! Yukio exclaimed, his dark gray eyes widening in panic. Did that mean they could literally die during a test? Was that even legal? Sensei, what do you mean when you said we become genin? Emi chimed in, seemingly less affected by the hinted knowledge that she could die sometime before the day's end. Aren't we already genin? No, you're not, Hidan said, further shocking poor Yukio and taking great pleasure in it, said not a genin suspected. The academy exams were only really there to weed out the super weak brats and those who couldn't give a damn. The rest of you are only just a little less pathetic, so the genin exams were created to truly test you. What exactly do we have to do? Nanisher asked in a monotone, finally speaking up for the first time that day. Yukio took a moment to stare at the redhead, and Hidan seemed to do the same. That's the most you've ever said at once off your own back, isn't it, Red? Hidan asked, making Yukio and Emi both snicker. Nanisher groused and glared at the silver-haired shinobi in response, seemingly content to ignore his teammates' existences just as usual. Anyway, Hidan said, calling attention back to him, to answer Red's question, each of the Jonin sensei devised an exam for their teams. Since you guys were so lucky as to have me as a sensei, I've decided to try a more do-or-die approach. A fight for your lives as shinobi, so to speak. Who will we fight? Yukio asked, catching on to his sensei's meaning instantly. Maybe this test wouldn't be so bad. Rogue ninja? The Yuckage? Nah, you don't want to fight that old geezer, Hidan replied, shocking Yukio and the others a bit with his callous referral to the village leader. Instead, you will all be fighting me. Isn't that great? Hidan asked, his eyes wide with excitement, though Yukio felt only disappointment. They were meant to fight this moron? 3-1? Suddenly puffing up with glee, Yukio realized that this test of theirs would be easy. As far as Yukio had seen, Hidan was a childish idiot who'd made a rank like Jonin by luck or something. The most dangerous thing about him was his annoying habit of being late, and his stupid excuses. Nanisher grunted. Okay then, Hidan grinned. Yukio watched as the silver-haired Jonin reached into his black and red cloak and returned with something small and metallic. In Hidan's deceptively elegant hand was a pair of tiny little bells interconnected by a thin piece of pale ribbon. Tinkling chimes filled the air, the bells jostling with even the slightest of movements Hidan made as he dangled them in front of his 3 students, almost tauntingly. Yukio felt confusion as he gazed at the bells. What could they possibly have to do with the survival test? Your objective is to get these bells off of me, Hidan explained. But sensei, there are only 2. Emi immediately pointed out. Very astute girly, Hidan nodded, using that same nickname he had the day before Yukio noted. Hopefully he didn't get stuck with an annoying nickname either. Only 2 of you will be passing today's test. Those who fail will either be sent back to the academy or, well, let's just say we'll all hope you make it back to the academy. Now you have until, let's go with midday to get the bells or fail. Reaching into his cloak once again, Hidan pulled out a stylized bronze alarm clock and absent-mindedly set it, twisting the little knobs before nodding to himself. He gently sat the clock down on the grass and tied the bells to his left wrist. Yukio meanwhile let those words sink in. Glancing to his right at both Emi and Nanisher, he silently wondered if he could beat them to the bells and decided that he was best to stick with what he knew. He'd charge in head-on and see how good this Jonin really was. That way he was more likely to find a chink in the man's armor, and then BM. He'd have the bells. Now one more thing, brats, he then said, calling Yukio's attention back once more, though this time, there was something inherently different about his sensei. He still wore that same goofy wide grin on his face though. What changed? Yukio silently wondered. I've been told there shouldn't be any lasting damage done during this little test of ours. That means no lethal blows, no maiming, no gouging and especially no skewering, sadly. He then stated sincerely, looking highly disappointed and deflated as he spoke. Yukio could almost feel Emi relaxing beside him, and even he himself felt a lot better after Hidan had said that lethal blows weren't allowed, even if it was kind of obvious. That is until he continued to speak. You guys can do whatever the hell you want though. The insane Jonin added on, almost like an afterthought, but Yukio had caught the Jonin's meaning and couldn't seem to focus on anything else. Yukio was too busy coping with the realization that his Jonin sensei was upset that he wasn't allowed to murder them. Because there wasn't any doubt in Yukio's young mind that Hidan was being serious when he'd used the words maiming, gouging and skewering, nor was his disappointment in the apparent lack of maiming, gouging and skewering he was allowed to inflict while fighting them an act. Hidan honestly wouldn't mind. No, he actually seemed more than happy with the idea of murdering them all. Come at me with the intent to kill. Go! Hidan called. Yukio was having none of it. He turned and ran, jumping up into the trees and maneuvering himself through the branches until he found a good perch hidden from view by the plumage. This gave him the dual advantage of a good position for surprise attacks and the monitoring of his foe. Glancing around, he noticed that Emi and Nanisher had also hidden themselves since he couldn't see them in the clearing. Only their sensei remained, standing perfectly still, having not moved an inch since he'd said the word go. Yukio idly wondered what would occur next until, well, it happened. Nanisher shot out of some bushes not too far away from where Yukio was hidden and flitted across the field with blinding speed. Yukio was slightly jealous as he watched his rival engage their Jonin sensei. The bastard had jumped up and thrown an axe kick at their sensei's chest when Hidan carelessly reached out, grabbed his leg and tossed him back. Imagine Yukio's surprise when Nanisher didn't just skid back a couple of feet, but literally flew through the air and commando rolled across the grass for several meters with wide eyes. Those shocked emerald orbs then narrowed into determined slits. Nanisher scrambled to stand up again, his skin dirted, grazed and bruised already. Yukio watched as Nanisher charged again, and each time he was flung away like a bug. Inwardly, Yukio felt his heart sink further and further with each new skid mark his rival created in the grassy field. Finally, it seemed Nanisher had become frustrated enough to talk. Stop looking so bored and fight me. I'm not like anything you've ever seen before. Nanisher seethed as he ran forward one more time, his fist cocked back and ready to cause damage. Really, Red? Hidan asked nonchalantly, his face still contorted into the same bored expression he'd taken up around the time of Nanashi's 5th attempt. Because I can confidently say I have seen someone exactly like you before. Let me give you a little warning, it didn't end so good for him. Hidan suddenly grinned as Nanisher came closer and closer. This time though it was a little different, Yukio noticed. This time Hidan's smile was just a little bit deranged. Just as Nanisher threw and finally landed a punch on Hidan, the silver-haired man exploded into a cloud of smoke. It's some sort of clone! Emi's voice rang out through the clearing, having realized just before Yukio and Nanisher what was going on. Wind release, great breakthrough, futon de tapa. Hidan's voice rang out through the clearing, making Nanisher freeze. Suddenly, a loud gushing sound could be heard before Nanisher was swept off of his feet by a monstrous wave of what appeared to be wind, and sent hurling sideways across the training field, even crashing through a tree as he went. As a result, before he finally skidded to a halt curled up on the ground, crumpled as he was, Yukio stared on as Nanisher stayed there, incapacitated and seemingly unable to move mere minutes into the exchange. In a blur of movement, Hidan jumped out from the tree line adjacent to Yukio's position before walking sedately towards Nanashi's prone form. Stopping only to loom over the red-haired boy, Yukio watched frozen as Nanisher flinched upon seemingly recognizing Hidan's shadow. Apparently satisfied by the reaction, Hidan turned around to gaze out upon the field where Yukio and Emi still hid. Tilting his head to the side, just as he had the day before, Yukio had a series of cracks from Hidan's neck before the Jonin rolled his shoulders and held out his right hand to the side. Yukio was confused. Was he signaling them or something? When Hidan suddenly spoke, his voice raised to a yell. Unseal. There was a popping sound before smoke began to billow out of Hidan's outstretched arm. Yukio watched curiously from his hiding place among the trees as the smoke cleared to reveal a terrifying weapon. In Hidan's hand was a monstrous-looking scythe almost as big as the silver-haired Jonin was. It had a black handle and 3 crimson blades that got smaller from top to bottom, giving the scythe a lethal look. Holding the weapon, Yukio decided that indeed his sensei could look scary if he wanted to. Of course, he still had that same stupid smile plastered on his face, but his eyes, his violet-colored eyes, were as hard as diamond as he stared out across the field. His glacial gaze was gleaming with something. Whatever it was, it left Yukio too afraid to identify it. This is my primary weapon, he then proclaimed to the open air, his voice carrying across the training field. Yukio could see Nanisher watching the Jonin from his position behind him on the ground, his eyes wide and terrified. Hidan's tone meanwhile was jovial, but his own eyes destroyed any effect his childish smile or his easy demeanor may have had. His next words only furthered the terrifying effect his actions had upon Yukio, and by the looks of his reaction, Nanisher too. It's a very versatile weapon and is very hard to use, let alone master. Its main purpose is to wound, not kill, despite its looks. Today, I'm going to show you why I love it so much, intimately. As soon as those last words left his mouth, Yukio did not envy Nanisher anymore. In fact, Yukio forewent his hiding spot and bolted with only one thought on his mind. They were all going to die. Running headlong through the trees, Yukio's whole body felt numb as he jumped from branch to branch in a desperate attempt to escape. Sticking to the foliage, he hoped he was at least a little hidden, but that hope froze along with his body when he heard it. This cable allows me to further increase the scythe's range by swinging it through the air. Let's test it. Hidan's voice suddenly chimed, and it was way too close for Yukio's comfort. Turning his head, Yukio felt his own eyes widen in horror as he caught sight of Hidan standing several feet below him on the forest floor with his evil-looking scythe almost casually hoisted over his shoulder. He had a maniacal grin on his face, his eyes shining in sadistic glee. Yukio mentally retracted every statement or thought that implied Hidan was an idiot of any kind. He wasn't a moron or even a person, he was some sort of monster. Noticing the long metal cable sliding out from to the handle end of the scythe just as Hidan had described, Yukio's eyes trailed down the black metal cable until he was staring at Hidan's left hip where it seemed to wind itself. Yukio was suddenly given a flash of an academy lecture on chakra strings and forgot all about it just as quickly. He was too busy trying to guess at what kind of pain that cable would cause should he be hit, let alone the sharp edges of the triple blade at the other end of the scythe. Catching Yukio's gaze before following it to his scythe, the genin-to-be was not comforted when Hidan's smile shifted to a devious smirk. Slowly, he then hefted the large scythe up off of his shoulder and in a smooth movement showing no strain whatsoever, swung the weapon in a downward arc until the tip of the uppermost blade was just above the ground. His cold eyes on Yukio, watching his reaction the genin hopeful guessed, he then suddenly let the weapon drop just an inch to make contact with the ground. A large dent immediately imprinted itself in the earth under the weight of the weapon, thin spider-like cracks splitting the ground under the pressure. Silently, Yukio wondered how such a weighty thing could become airborne, let alone act as a projectile as Hidan had suggested. Hell, Yukio was puzzled at how the Jonin could lift the bloody thing. As you can guess, it's kind of heavy. Let's see how much that inhibits me, bandana boy. Letting out a terrified yelp, Yukio jumped back just as the horrific weapon embedded itself in the tree he'd just been standing in front of. He hadn't even really seen his sensei lift the scythe, only a barely perceived blur of movement, and instinct had kept Yukio in one piece. Yukio watched as the scythe twitched before. With a tug on the connecting cable by Hidan, the enormous weapon shot back into the waiting grip of its homicidal master. Feeling desperate now as his would-be murderer approached, Yukio reached into the pouch strapped to his left thigh and grabbed onto the first thing his hand touched. By this time, Hidan was close enough to Yukio to be only seconds away from killing him, so flinging his hand at Hidan, the 12-year-old hurled a handful of shuriken at the jonin at near point-blank range. To Yukio's horror, Hidan twisted the hand gripping his scythe, raising the cable up to deflect the swarm of shuriken thrown at him. Hidan came closer and closer, his expression filled to the brim with sadistic glee as he reached forward towards Yukio's shaking form. The blood-colored blades of the man's scythe gleamed, and Yukio knew then and there without a doubt in his mind that he was going to. Ding! Chapter 5, Part 1, Chapter 4. Old Man Kamizuki and the C-Rank Mission. Knocked out, just like that. A tap to the head and Emi had been out cold. When she'd awoken, she'd found Yukio tied to a tree and Nanashir sitting several feet away with a scowl on his face. From there, Hidan had given only Emi and Nanashir lunch and told them not to feed Yukio while he went to check with the yuckage to see if they could have another go at the test. Truthfully, Emi wasn't sure she wanted one, not with Hidan anyway. However, Emi had quickly tabled that line of thought when she realized that Yukio hadn't eaten breakfast. None of them had, so maybe they should share the food. Surprisingly, Nanashir was the first to agree with the proposal. Reasoning that Hidan wasn't around, Emi and Nanashir had both fed Yukio. When Hidan had suddenly appeared, his expression somehow even more murderous than it had been earlier, Emi had honestly thought that Hidan would kill them all. It was as if this had been the final straw for the obviously insane man, so when Hidan had suddenly done a metaphorical 180 and smiled at them, Emi had almost fainted. When Hidan told them they had passed, Yukio had fainted, much to Emi's later amusement. After reviving the dead last, Hidan had explained the real purpose behind the test: teamwork. However, while they may have passed, the shame of failing in the first place, let alone how they failed, had yet to fade, and Emi knew she wasn't the only one who thought so. I thought he was going to kill me, Yukio whined loudly, grating at last Emi's nerve with every word that came out of his annoying mouth. He just kept coming at me with that huge scythe and that crazy look on his face, and oh, I thought I was gonna die. Yes, okay, we get it. You've seen the light. Get over it, Sano, Emi exclaimed, her annoyance with the bandana-wearing idiot overcoming her usually kind disposition. But Yukio began to defend himself, but never got the chance since he was interrupted by their, as earlier mentioned, borderline psychotic sensei. See here, Red? This is usually where the unsuspecting moron gets his ass handed to him by the girl he just pissed off. He then said slowly and in a sagely tone, as if teaching a valuable life lesson to a very small child. You should never be the moron, Red. You shouldn't be the constipated emo asshole either, but you seem to be a bit stuck in your ways, so I'll let it be for now. Just don't think we won't work on it later, MK? HN. Good, now come on. We're late for the meeting. He then smiled that same goofy grin he'd had before when they all thought he was a pathetic loser. Then again, now they thought he was a murderous semi-functioning sociopath, and Emi just hoped to God he didn't influence them too much. She wasn't holding her breath though. Finally sighing, Emi kept on walking down the corridor until they came to a large set of double doors, behind which was a meeting they had to go to, if Hidan was to be believed. Emi reached forward to knock but was beaten to it when Hidan slammed the doors open where they most likely cracked the plaster walls if the loud bang was any indication. Tentatively entering the office, Emi was greeted with the sight of a room full of curious jonins. Hidan strolled past where she'd paused in the doorway, and the jonins in turn parted like the Red Sea until Emi caught sight of her sensei's destination. Sitting at a large wooden desk covered in large stacks of paper was an old man who, in Emi's mind at least, resembled her grandfather. He had graying brown hair and the brightest blue eyes she had ever seen, surrounded by wrinkled, weathered skin and thick eyebrows. This man was Kamizuki Shigeru, the Shodame Yuckage. You're late. The Yuckage deadpanned, not even bothering to question Hidan or reprimand him for the damage he'd done to the door. Instead, Hidan stopped in front of the old man's desk to have what looked like a short staring contest with him. Who won was not clear to Emi. Yeah, sorry about that, Hidan grinned, not looking sorry at all. I was on death row. Hidan grinned sheepishly, scratching the back of his head with his eyes shut and his expression that of childish embarrassment. Are you ever going to actually tell me the truth? The Yuckage asked with a sigh. But I do. I've never lied a day in my life. Hidan exclaimed defensively, earning him several disbelieving looks from around the room. Emmy noticed she wasn't the only one staring as Hidan showed such blatant disrespect to the Yuckage, and the way the elder shinobi actually let him do it. So, Hidan, I see you've brought your team here even though it was quite obvious you were meant to let them go home after the exams. The Yuckage said, changing the subject now as he gazed at Emmy and the two boys standing a little behind her, both shocked into silence just as she assumed. Not even loudmouth Yukio managed to respond. Fine, just tell me, how did they go? The Yuckage finally asked, turning his attention back onto Hidan. He oddly seemed to accept anything odd about the silver-haired Jonin and his behavior as normal. Oh, they were pathetic, Hidan said dismissively, making Emmy flinch. Pathetic was a pretty hard-hitting word in this kind of context. I was tempted to actually put them out of their misery, no matter what kind of long-ass lectures you'd make me listen to. Hidan continued on casually, as if he hadn't just stated that he had indeed contemplated and maybe seriously attempted to murder them all. But you didn't. No, they're not as annoying as some of the other brats you could have landed me with. Hidan replied to the Yuckage's statement. Again, it wasn't a question. Good, I'm glad you like them, the Yuckage finally said, making everyone in the room blanch. Like them? Like them. If that was the case, then Emmy would hate to see how Hidan reacted to someone he didn't like. You four will be officially known as Team Hidan from now on, the old Kage finished. Oh, come off it, old man. Hidan grinned at the same moment that the whole room seemed to take a collective breath and then hold it. Had Hidan actually just called the village leader an old man? To his face? How uncreative is that? Couldn't we at least be Team Awesome or Team Kick-Ass? I am not old, was the Yuckage's only reply. You are. You just won't admit it, Hidan retorted cheekily. Get out and take your genin with you, idiot, the Yuckage barked. Hidan shrugged at the order and, after spinning around on his heels, confidently strode through the room with a smooth, casual gait. As he passed, the Jonin began to mutter and whisper amongst themselves. That guy's a Jonin? I feel sorry for those kids. As more and more began to slander and question her new teacher, Emmy felt the uncharacteristic need to defend him. Sure, he was probably going to get them all killed somehow, but dang it, the guy was her sensei now. They shouldn't ridicule him just because his methods were a little, very extreme and he lacked any knowledge on the concept of respect and sanity. In fact, Emmy had just opened her mouth to give those Jonin a piece of her mind and maybe even put a healthy dose of fear into them when faced with someone like Hidan, but it seemed that the Yuckage beat her to it. Oh, and Hidan, the old man called out, making Hidan pause mid-stride just a few feet away from Emmy and the other members of the newly dubbed Team Hidan. Yes? That means no more A-rank missions, the Yuckage said, as if talking to a young child before going on to say, another restriction I will have to enforce will be no teaching them anything over B rank until they are at Chunin level at least. You got that? That also means no explosions, death traps or battles to the death labeled as training. You also cannot kill them if they annoy you like you decided to do with my ANBU. Emmy felt her eyes widen in shock. Hidan had killed ANBU? And he'd gotten away with that? How? Why? Seriously? I'm not an idiot, old man Kamizuki, and you know what the ANBU are like. They just... what they were doing. It grates at my nerves is all, Hidan said vaguely, but in all seriousness, leaving every occupant of the room dumbstruck, with the sole exception being the Yuckage himself. You strung them up by their entrails, the old man deadpanned. It was a fitting punishment, and you know it, old man, Hidan groused. And I told you to stop calling me that, the Yuckage growled, finally starting to look at least a little bit angry, though for the wrong reasons in Emmy's opinion. When you die, old man, Hidan retorted. Whatever. Just make sure you don't kill anyone on your way out, the Yuckage grouched, having obviously given up on the silver-haired shinobi as a lost cause. His comment, however, was met with various reactions from the other factions of Jonin still in the room. Hidan nodded and made an about-face, gently ushering Emmy and Yukio out, with Nanisher trailing behind of his own, looking to be a little too shocked to do anything else. Hidan winked quickly down at Emmy, that same shit-eating grin on his face, the only warning Emmy had. If you say so, old man, Hidan replied carelessly from over his shoulder before slamming the doors shut behind him just in time to avoid whatever projectile the Yuckage had hurled at him for the comment. A loud thud was heard as the object rebounded off the closed door. I'm not old, you evil purple-eyed bastard, could be heard being screamed from the other side of the set of wooden double doors. Emmy just let out a tired sigh at her sensei's antics, no longer surprised. She'd once been told that the strongest ninjas were always a little odd. If her sensei was this crazy, he must be powerful. He was already scary enough, so why not? Oh well. This is what she got for wanting to be a ninja. It had been almost 5 months since Naruto had taken on his genin team, and he could honestly say that he was both surprised and a little proud of himself since he hadn't killed one of them yet. That's not to say he was premeditating and planning to murder his students. No, more like they annoyed him almost constantly to the point that he was driven to actually trying to kill them. Okay, not really all of them. It was more specifically just Yukio and Nanashur that bugged the crap out of him. Naruto was aware that several years ago, the idea of honestly contemplating, let alone succeeding, to kill someone would have upset him greatly. In the last 5.5 years or so since he'd awoken in his new life, Naruto had changed drastically, though it was in the last 2.5 years that he'd really gotten used to his new personality, and begun to make an identity for himself. Already after only 5 months of interacting around the village proper, he was considered Yugakure's very own Anko, Kakashi and Jiraiya all rolled into one, minus the obvious pervertedness, with a hint of the old Naruto thrown in. It was easy to say that he both scared the shit out of and amused many amongst the villagers and shinobi alike. In fact, a rather common sight to see in the village hidden in hot water these days was either Yukio and Nanashur, or both, running for their lives with a ticked-off Naruto on their tails, threatening their lives with anything from kunai to household appliances. Some of the Chunin even held betting pots on who would be on the receiving end of Naruto's wrath next, and with what he would proceed to threaten their lives with. Hell, some people actually bet on which of his students would survive the longest. Kurama had been especially amused by the last one. Speaking of Kurama, the Nine Tails had gotten used to the new Naruto/Hidan hybrid fairly quickly. It even considered this new and improved Naruto friend just as much as the old one, in some weird, screwed-up way. Naruto and his antics were amusing enough either way, and speaking of his antics, Naruto had just arrived at the training grounds 3 hours late with a grin on his face, just as usual. "Sorry I'm late guys, but I was trying to create my own nudist colony, and no one would join," Naruto said in mock disappointment, enjoying the annoyed and somewhat gobsmacked expressions he received in response. "Liar!" Yukio screamed, as usual. "Really, sensei, a nudist colony? That's the best you could come up with?" Emi asked, looking a little disgusted at the thought. What do you mean come up with?" Naruto asked, forever oblivious to his own lies. Shrugging his shoulders for show, Naruto decided to drop the M-bomb. "Anyway, today we'll be going up to Old Man Kamizuki's office for a mission." As soon as the word mission left his lips, Naruto was bodily grabbed by Yukio and dragged from the training grounds, an unamused Emi and a silent Nanashur trailing behind. Naruto grinned at his students. They may annoy him, but he did like them. They each reminded him a little of someone he knew, mostly the old Team 7 he'd been a part of. That was probably why he had such a soft spot for Yukio and a love of agitating Nanashur, not to mention his true passion these days, torturing them all at the same time. Upon reaching the 4-story administration's building, Team Kickass, as Naruto had secretly labeled them in every way other than the official one, began navigating their way to Old Man Kamizuki's office. Grinning down at the determined expressions on his genin's little faces, Naruto could remember his own frustration with D-rank mission back when he'd been stuck with them. Thank God those days were over. Eventually they came to Kamizuki's office and the double doors leading to it. Sticking to what was usual in an ordinary day around Yugakure, Naruto kicked the doors open with a bang, listening as they cracked against the walls with a perverted sense of satisfaction shared only by Kurama. "I take it you're here for a mission." Kamizuki didn't even bother looking up from his paperwork to address them. He probably thought it was pretty cool when he did it, and Naruto could see that his genin thought so too. Grinning like a fool, Naruto knew exactly what to say to piss the man off and destroy his omniscient act. "Sure thing, old man." And just like that, the effect Kamizuki was going for was completely destroyed by the old Kage himself, when he bellowed at the top of his lungs, "Stop calling me that." "No," Naruto stated simply, grinning maniacally at the man. "Sensei." Looking down at Emi, Naruto was slightly surprised when the girl punched him not so subtly in the ribs, and gave him a hard stare that screamed, "Get me a good mission now." Naruto internally sighed. It was time to end his fun and get to the point, it seemed. "Right, we're here for a mission," old man Naruto said bluntly. "Good," Kamizuki nodded. "We have several standing missions that you can take within the next few hours. They include weeding, walking the Nakamura clan's goat, babysitting my grandson, babysitting my other grandson, babysitting my son, harvesting a wheat crop, or—" "No thanks, old man Kamizuki," Naruto interrupted him, making sure to look bored. "You can do my paperwork for me," the Kage suggested, looking just that little bit hopeful. But even then, even with Hidan's sadistic tendencies firmly affixed as his own, Naruto wasn't that cruel. He even stated so. Fuck no. Even I wouldn't make my students do something like that. Naruto exclaimed indignantly, viciously crushing the poor old man's hopes and dreams. I was talking to you. Kamizuki deadpanned. We'll take a C rank. Naruto said, completely ignoring the old Kage's last comment. Are your students prepared for that? The aging Yukage asked seriously. Naruto immediately took on a thoughtful expression of his own and began muttering to himself. Probably not, but they can't be as bad as when they started. They need to lose limbs to be that bad. Looking up to see an amused Yukage and 3 distressed genin, Naruto knew he had accomplished all of his aims in life for the next 10 minutes. Yeah, sure, they'll be fine. Naruto said in a louder, more confident voice though to the genin. It probably sounded very fake, as intended. Very well, Kamizuki nodded. You will be escorting Sashimi Shirono to the Land of Wind. Suddenly getting another fun idea, Naruto frowned at his aging friend and crinkled his nose slightly in distaste. Sounds like a bore, he stated rather bluntly before asking, what was that about babysitting a few of your brats? Sensei! Nanashir suddenly yelled, looking beyond pissed at the silver-haired jonin. You bastard! Yukio chimed before the 2 genin tackled Hidan bodily. Naruto was impressed when Nanashir managed to grab both of his arms and pin them down so that Yukio could climb up his torso and shove his smaller hand over Naruto's mouth, effectively shutting him up given he didn't seriously struggle. Naruto played along, glaring down at a suspiciously innocent-looking Emi who was already talking to a highly amused Kamizuki, silently promising retribution. He meant we'll take the C-rank Yukage-sama. Emi said just a little too sweetly. Yes, that is exactly what he meant. Yukio chimed. I see. Sashimi will be informed to wait for you at the front gates. Don't be late, Hidan. Kamizuki said. As soon as the words left his mouth, both Yukio and Nanashir let go of Naruto and grinned in mutual accomplishment with Emi. Yukio and Emi even high-fived while Nanashir smirked triumphantly in the background. Oh well, it was okay. Naruto would get them back later. His revenge would be by far superior to anything they could possibly pull off. Whatever you say, old man, Naruto grinned, ducking just in time to avoid the paperweight that had been aimed at his head. Don't call me that! Kamizuki yelled. Naruto almost laughed aloud as he pushed his genin out of the room and, just for spite, slammed the doors shut behind him. With just a tad of some good old wind chakra, the action created a nice gust of air headed directly for Kamizuki's desk, the same desk covered from edge to edge in stacks upon stacks of paper. Damn you to hell, Hidan! Kamizuki screamed in muffled rage from inside the office. Naruto ignored the old man's cursing, which was, in Naruto's humble opinion, very weak, and turned to his students with a suddenly serious expression on his face. Alright kids, you have 20 minutes to grab a week's worth of supplies and meet me at the front gate. Dismissed. The serious face must have worked because Emi let out a small squeak before the 3 bolted for their homes as if the hounds of hell were at their heels. Granted, he'd probably reminded them a little too much of their genin exams for them to be comfortable in any way, shape, or form around him. He still grinned whenever he remembered that day. Whenever he scared someone like that, he always felt like he had when he pulled a good prank back when he was a kid. Back when he was still the old Naruto. Since he couldn't really pull pranks like the ones he remembered Hidan accomplished in his youth, well, that, and he wasn't quite that psychotic yet, he decided he'd pull a prank Naruto and Hidan could get behind. One that, for the most part, didn't involve murder of any degree, i.e. scaring the shit out of everyone. Sashimi Shirono was a beautiful woman. She was of a modest height with long pale hair that cascaded down her back, smooth unblemished skin and light hazel eyes. When she hired Shinobi to escort her to the Land of Wind, she had no idea what the hell she'd gotten herself into. Nanashir found that he was the first to arrive at the gates. It wasn't very surprising, not when he had been the first to arrive at the first gathering of Team Hidan, and the first to arrive at every meeting since then. He'd spent less than 5 minutes in his home. 3 of those were spent gathering necessary supplies and 1 was spent informing his father of his first C-rank mission to which he was told he was not to fail. At any cost. It seemed the old proverb would always prove true. You can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. Not that Nanashir really had any friends. The closest he had was Yukio Sano, and Nanashir had always thought of the boy as the dead last of the academy, a hopeless excuse for a ninja. Or so he'd thought anyway. Under Hidan Sensei's torturous, if not insane tutelage, Nanashir had noticed that even if they had yet to learn many jutsu, which he had secretly begun to suspect was because Hidan Sensei didn't know many useful techniques below B rank as the Yukage had first dictated was his limit, they had surely grown as shinobi. So even if Nanashir thought his sensei was a hopelessly tardy loon with a few shiny toys, he respected that he was at least a decent teacher. Nanashiro was broken from his thoughts by the arrival of both Emi and Yukio. The two returned the nod Nanashiro sent their way before they turned their attention to the only other person still loitering around the large red torii gates leading into Yukikure. She was a beautiful woman with long pale blonde hair that she had pulled up into an intricate bun at the back of her head. She wore a pale pink traditional kimono and stood with the quiet grace of a lady. Glancing at the other two, Nanashiro nodded in silent agreement with Emi while Yukio looked a little confused. When Emi took the lead, Nanashiro and Yukio, who had finally understood what the other two had communicated to each other, followed, and together, the three genin approached the lone civilian woman. "Are you Sashimi Shirono?" Emi inquired once they'd reached the woman. Emi had been elected their official spokesperson, so to speak, early on when it became apparent that both Yukio and Hidan sensei had about as much tact as a rock, and Nanashiro himself barely spoke beyond what was necessary to function. Nanashiro had noted even back in the academy that Emi was both level-headed and compassionate, a good trait to have as a medic nin and, as it happens, a leader. "Yes, I am." "Who might you be?" the beautiful woman, Sashimi, asked in return. "We are your escorts. I am Emi and this is Yukio and Nanashiro." Emi introduced them, indicating as to whom each name belonged before adding, "Our sensei is Hidan, but he'll probably be a while so." "Ah, good. You're all here." A familiar voice interrupted the girl. Nanashiro spun on his heels, disbelief breaking through his emotional barriers only for those jumbled feelings to be blatantly displayed in his expression. For once though, Nanashiro was too shocked to care because walking towards him in a casual gait was Hidan sensei. "Have any of you seen our client by any chance?" It took under 0.2 seconds for Nanashiro to realize that this man could not be his sensei. He was on time, and he was being sincerely polite, two things Nanashiro knew for a fact Hidan sensei was physically incapable of. Which could mean only one thing: this man wasn't Hidan. It also seemed that he wasn't the only one to think so. "Who are you?" Yukio yelled at the top of his lungs, his expression murderous as he glared daggers at the imposter. Already in his hands were two kunai, his fingers curled around the handles until they were white. "What are you talking about, Yukio?" The unknown man tried to reason, probably trying to throw them off of his tracks by playing innocent. Idiot. Hidan sensei didn't play innocent. He was childish and goofy, but he could not pull off that kind of sincere incomprehension when in the face of such allegations. Hidan sensei would sooner try to kill them all for threatening him, not try to talk them down. "Foolish imposter. He asked you who the fuck you are," Nanashiro grounded out lowly from behind clenched teeth. He'd already dropped into a defensive position in front of Sashimi before he spoke, his tanto drawn and pointed threateningly at the imposter. "Nanashiro, what are you doing? I don't know who you are, but you made a huge mistake in disguising yourself as Hidan sensei." Emi snarled angrily, interrupting the imposter before he could spout any more nonsense. Instead, she did what any sane 12-year-old would do in this kind of situation. She tried to emulate the scariest person she knew. Nanashiro was not at all surprised when he realized that that person was Hidan sensei himself. It was just too bad Emi wasn't very good at being Hidan. "When Hidan sensei catches up with you, you are going to wish you were dead, you ass." Emi growled out, the curse word sounding awkward and forced to Nanashiro when coming out of the girl's mouth, even if her words rung true enough with everything Nanashiro knew about his tardy psycho sensei. "Our sensei may not have much going him in skill, power or intelligence as a shinobi, but he one crazy loon and he will screw you up." "What dash?" When the imposter tried to speak again, Yukio shot himself forward, surprising Nanashiro with his speed. He hadn't been that fast a few months ago, Nanashiro was sure, and grabbed a hold of the imposter's cloak. Using the man's body as leverage, Yukio managed to scale the imposter like a ladder until he had his legs wrapped around the imposter's torso and a kunai at his throat. "You see, you made 2 mistakes, asshole," Yukio spat out. 1. Hidan sensei is always 3 hours late. To everything. No matter what. Number 2. Hidan sensei never calls us by our given names. Ever. You hardly studied him at all, did you, dipshit? Nanashiro asked a little tauntingly before he was brought out of his anger by a worried voice. "What are you doing to him?" Sashimi asked, panicking. Turning to the woman, their client, Nanashiro silently amended. He waited for Emi to reply, being the more reassuring of the two. Yukio wouldn't be too good at reassuring anyone given his current position at the imposter's throat. "Miss, please stay back. We don't know who this man is, but he is not our sensei." Emi spoke calmly, trying to soothe the young woman. When Yukio let out a short shout, Nanashiro turned just in time to see Yukio land on his ass with Hidan sensei's imposter brushing off his cloak rather nonchalantly. Then, a familiar goofy grin spread across the man's face, and he turned towards Sashimi, who still looked rather unsettled. Sorry about that. I'm Hidan. My brats tend to get a little rowdy when they're given too much freedom and some time to try and think for themselves, so don't mind them. I'll assume you're Sashimi Shirono? The man who had apparently been Hidan-sensei the whole time, and likely just messing with them, again said. Yes, Sashimi nodded cautiously. Her body language was once again strong and firm at Hidan-sensei's introduction and assurances, though how Hidan-sensei could be in any way assuring was beyond Nanisher. Good, that would have been pretty awkward otherwise. Hidan-sensei grinned childishly with a wink. We will be your escort to the land of wind. A bunch of kids and an idiot? The blonde asked, looking skeptical from the three genin to their sensei. You shouldn't call Bandana Boy such names, Hidan smiled, ignoring the indignant hey. Yukio shouted in response and continued on to say, but since you asked for final confirmation, then yes, we were definitely your escort the last time I checked. Now that all the drama's over with, let's move out, Hidan cried overdramatically before marching out the gates of Yubikure. Nanisher silently watched the man he'd known for scarcely 5.5 months and wondered how he'd survived this far in the village with him, let alone the elemental countries. You weren't serious earlier thinking he was an imposter, right? A feminine voice asked, breaking Nanisher from his thoughts. Nanisher turned around to give Sashimi a blank stare before turning around and following his wayward sensei, ignoring the question altogether. She obviously hadn't spent much time with Hidan-sensei. Imtiriried, Yukio whined, making sure to drag the two words out for as long as humanly possible. Hey, Bandana Boy! Hidan-sensei barked, his purple eyes narrowing in contempt as he stared at the dead last of the Yugakure Shinobi Academy. What was rule number 3 of the 5 core rules? No whinging. Yukio pouted at having to be reminded again. It wasn't his fault it was so boring. He thought C-rank missions would be more interesting than this, but all they'd done was walk. That wasn't very special. Yukio walked all the time. The only difference now was that he was walking with their client and his team in the woods surrounding Hai no Kuni towards the land of wind instead of around the village hidden in hot water. The 5 core rules? Great. Clueless, Sashimi just had to ask that question. No, Hidan-sensei's 5 core rules. Emi corrected, hopefully having answered well enough and directed the question away so that nothing too painful resurfaced. What's the difference? Sashimi asked, looking a little annoyed at having been corrected by a 12-year-old over such a minute detail. The fact that she was even questioning it, well, if it told Yukio only one thing about Sashimi, it was that she obviously hadn't spent much time with Hidan-sensei. Everything. Nanisher grunted in his standard bored tone, though the fact that he'd spoken at all was probably because the conversation had steered into touchy territory for all 3 genin. Some things just shouldn't be witnessed, let alone experienced, by mortal men, Yukio had long since decided. What are the 5 core rules then? Sashimi asked again, seeming to make it a point of fixing her mistake while glancing at Emi. Of course, the blonde had to ask again. Yukio braced himself for the inevitable, but nothing could prepare him for the mental horrors such drilling had done on his young psyche. Rule number 1. Hidan-sensei is always right. Nanisher spoke automatically, his usually bored voice now an even duller monotone, somehow, his face pale and his eyes blank. Rule number 2. Do not, under any circumstance, wake Hidan-sensei up. Emi continued seamlessly, her voice just as dull and lifeless, her expression vague as she spoke. Rule number 3. No whinging. Yukio spoke before he was conscious of it. His voice, like the others, was a complete monotone as he spoke. He could feel his expression slackening and his eyelids drooping to half-mast, making him look just as much like a lifeless doll as the others. Rule number 4. Do as Hidan-sensei says, not as he does. Nanisher droned on again before Emi went on to say an obligatory, and the most important, rule number 5, don't piss Hidan-sensei off. All 3 genin stated in perfect unison, their faces mirror images, each revealing none of the utter horror and turmoil they felt inside. Oh. Well, that's just, Sashimi tried to speak but couldn't seem to find anything fitting to say. However, it wasn't over yet. In continued unison, the 3 genin rattled off the remaining lines, just as they'd been taught, all still walking at a sedate pace with Sashimi in the middle of their formation. As one they stated, failure to comply with the 5 core rules will result in the more than likely maiming, gouging and or skewering of more than one part, if not all, of the human anatomy. Hidan-sensei is not liable for any damages, injuries or deaths caused in the event that one or more of the 5 core rules has been broken. Results may vary. Does not include batteries. Oh, was all Sashimi managed in response. There was complete silence for the next hour or so after that.